From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, fun and easy home remedies for scabies. And now, the podcast host who keeps his skin looking smooth, supple, and decidedly prepubescent, Pete Dominic!
Oh, yeah. Everybody always says that about me, that my skin is decidedly prepubescent. Thank you, Pico. And look for those simple, convenient solutions for scabies. Was that it? You're the best. Thank you, Pete. And thank you for press and play on today's episode of Stand Up, where your favorite historian, Kenneth C. Davis, will explore the history of the separation of church and state in America, given the fact that the Supreme Court decided yesterday that the state of Maine would have to fund religious education. And don't worry, it won't stop there. Chief Justice John Roberts' opinion, of course, has the potential to dismantle secular public education in the United States, and we get to the root of that with both Kenneth C. Davis and my very special guest, Wajahat Ali, who joins me first, who I think you are going to really like. We talked a little bit about work-life balance, and then we got into yesterday's hearings and the Supreme Court decision. With Waj, I think you're going to love both these conversations here on day 519 of the Biden presidency. There are 139 days until the midterm elections. Day 4 of the January 6th committee hearings revealing evidence that Trump was involved in a plan to put forward fake electors, and we learned so much more. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen backed President Biden's position that a recession is not inevitable. Apparently, Asia is buying up Russia's discounted oil, dulling the effects of sanctions from the West. Most of the additional oil apparently is going to two countries, China and India, who have huge populations. China's imports of Russian oil hit a record high in May and made Russia the country's largest supplier. And India's gone from taking in almost no Russian oil to more than 760,000 barrels a day. And while we'll wait to see if we've all been conned on a federal gun deal, and I'll talk about that in a moment, actual progress has come to Rhode Island. Congratulations to my friend Shannon Watts, Mom's Demand there. Providence Journal writing that the governor of Rhode Island, Dan McKee, plans to sign the ban on firearm magazines that hold more than 10 rounds and two other newly passed gun bills on Tuesday. Once signed into law, the measure will make Rhode Island the 11th state, plus the District of Columbia, to place restrictions on the size of firearm magazines. But hold on, let's check in with the U.S. Senate, where senators are working on a bipartisan gun safety bill following a spate of recent mass shootings across the countries. And they released the bill's text last night, folks. And here it is from Mediaite, I'm reading. The bill, which is drafted by 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats, focuses on red flag laws and enhanced background checks for younger gun buyers. It also focuses on closing the so-called boyfriend loophole, according to NBC News. If the bill becomes law, people who attempt to buy firearms under the age of 21 might be subject to a juvenile background check. While juvenile records are generally sealed, the text says some might be requested to look for, quote, disqualifying conduct for prospective gun buyers. I've always suggested they ask to look at their creative writing and art, these young people. Those are jokes. While juvenile records are, additionally, states are going to be offered grants to enact red flag laws, whether they accept them or not. Red flag laws, where enacted, can compel people viewed as a danger to themselves or to others to refrain from buying firearms or to surrender guns they already own. In a statement, senators said the changes in the bill will keep people safe from gun violence. The statement from the bipartisan group reads, "Today, we finalized bipartisan common sense legislation to protect America's children, keep our schools safe, and reduce the threat of violence across the country. Our legislation will save lives and will not infringe on any law-abiding American Second Amendment rights. We look forward to earning broad bipartisan support and passing our common sense legislation into law." So lots remains to be seen. The full text of 90 pages is out. A procedural vote on the bill expected, took place last night, if you want to see who voted against it, Marco Rubio. But now let's get back to the January 6th panel yesterday. The committee played deposition video from Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chairman, who testified that Trump had personally called her about helping to further the scheme to put forward fake electors. The committee also showed texts from an aide to Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, indicating that Johnson sought to hand deliver fake electors from his state and from Michigan to Vice President Mike Pence. The revelation came during the panel's fourth hearing this month, which focused the pressure applied to election officials and workers to overturn the 2020 results. We heard from Brad Raffensperger, Georgia's Secretary of State, testifying that Trump allies broke into his widowed daughter-in-law's house and that his wife received threats. More so than in the prior hearings, leaders of the special committee also sought yesterday to emphasize that Trump's false claims of election fraud were a significant threat to the nation's election system and democracy itself. But I think the most rage-inducing moment, or at least witness testimony, came from Georgia election worker who revealed the truth about all the rumors and lies being spread by Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump, including that the quote, USB port that stupid Rudy Giuliani falsely claimed helped rig the 2020 presidential election in Georgia against Donald Trump, turned out to just be a mint. A mint. Her name is Wandrea Shea Moss, and she shocked the country and the world yesterday with her testimony before the January 6th committee. The panel played clips of Giuliani and President Trump accusing Ruby Freeman and her mom, Shea Freeman Moss, and one other gentleman of being in some type of a scheme. They talked about all of the threats that they had faced and how their lives and their names had been ruined by all this. And if you didn't feel righteous indignation, then one has to question if you have a beating heart and are a decent human. But my friend Jason Johnson went viral yesterday with these comments on MSNBC that I want to share with you.
But the level of rage that I and people that I know had when we saw this testimony is beyond anything I've probably experienced since George Floyd. That's my grandmother. That is literally the kind of work that my grandmother used to do in Newark, New Jersey. Registering people to vote, taking seniors in buses to go here and there, getting young people registered to vote. The level of violence that the Republican organization engages in against black people on a regular basis should make everything that happens in this trial pale in comparison. This is what they do. This is what they do. This is why Randy Bowman and Raffles, this is why I don't care about them getting threatening calls. Because you know what happens to them? They go back to their offices and they get security. You know what happens to people on the Supreme Court when they get threatened? They get security paid for by the Senate, but not regular black people who are just doing their jobs. Not people who have lost their name, the ability to go to the grocery store, the ability to just live their regular lives for having the audacity to stand against the white nationalist coup that masquerades as the Republican Party. What angers me so much, honestly, Nicole, about that testimony is that I know that those women are going to get additional threats because they were brave enough to get on television and talk about what happened. And I also know that the party that is putting these hearings together is going to do little or nothing to keep those people safe when we face this again this fall. This was the most infuriating part of these hearings that I've ever seen. Every single one of these people should be in jail. And if they're not, it is an absolute abdication of responsibility by this committee, by Merrick Garland, all the way up into the White House.
Yes, sir. Can I get an amen? Jason Johnson with the burgundy jacket and the righteous indignation, channeling the anger and passion of so many people, not just black folks. I felt that as well when I watched that testimony yesterday. I'm sure you did, too. Comedian Laurie Kilmartin tweeted, "These hearings have me wondering, is crime illegal?" All right, well, that's all I've got to say here at the top. Those are some of the stories I wanted to dig a little bit more into. But now it's time to get to my first guest. Coming up, the great professor of history. He's not actually a professor. He's an author and he's a historian and a speaker and a teacher and just an amazing guy. Kenneth C. Davis will talk to us about the Supreme Court decision yesterday, the history of separation of church and state. He's always great. But right now, it's Wajahat Ali, who is now a Daily Beast contributor. He is a monster on social media, on Twitter. Go get his book, Go Back to Where You Came From. A lawyer, a playwright, one of the most talented commentators in the business. And we talk a little bit about that. I think how he's been kind of undervalued and underappreciated by the media industry, by the political media industry, he and Elie Mystal. And we talked a little bit about that, and we started by talking a little bit about how much we are working and we feel guilt and kind of a work-life balance, I think many of you will relate to. And then we get in, of course, to yesterday's hearings, the Supreme Court decision, and more. It's always a great day and a great conversation when Wajahat Ali joins me. Please follow him, support him, tweet him, and here we go.
Yeah, but no, like I feel like as I get older, maybe it's like, I don't know if it's laziness or like wisdom. Like, you know, you don't have to work all the time. I'm like,
why do you think we think that you do?
I think it's the way Americans are built. I think there's something strange within our culture that says, like, it's the puritanical culture that you have to always, quote unquote, be productive, even though wages haven't risen to productivity. And Americans, like more so than most workers in industrialized countries, leave more vacation days on the table. And even then, we feel like we're not being useful. And then we have all these self-help books about maximizing our time. And I think there's also like this part of like our culture where we feel guilty for simply like being normal and relaxing, which is like what happens in other European countries, like siestas and like Nordic countries where they pay taxes and the government actually like takes care of them. And it's like also immigrant mindset and just like type A, like all of it comes together. And I feel like it's just unhealthy. Like, I feel like people should be relaxing more. And I think we feel like relaxing is laziness, which is not the case.
I think those are all really good observations, but building on the other countries and cultures and safety nets, I mean, to some extent, we have to keep working for fear that we won't have any money for retirement, but even more specifically for healthcare, and even more specifically, maybe not for ourselves, but for our kids. I feel like if you don't do a great job at your job, you're going to get fired. And if you get fired, you're not going to have health care. And that is why you work so hard. And when you see somebody else working harder than you, you're like, wow, that guy's going to, I mean, it's a vicious circle and cycle. And I think it is uniquely American. And I know it's broken, but if you don't do it, then you're worried that you're going to lose your gig.
Well, you're going to lose your gig. You don't, and increasingly the safety net is being eroded. As Lindsey Graham said, they're going to go after Medicare and Social Security, which they called entitlements. So it's like, all right, you know what it reminds me of? It's like Pakistan in a way. When you're an industrialized country and you realize the government doesn't have your back, and you realize the rich are getting richer, it's like, I just got to take care of myself. You know, it doesn't mean that people become necessarily selfish, because it's a generous country also, but it's vicious. It's like, I got to take care of myself. I got to take care of my family. To each their own. I can't rely on anyone. I can't rely on other people. I can't rely on the government. I can't rely on local officials. Everyone's corrupt. So you got to make money. In order to make money, you need to make more money. And then I have to rely upon myself to get water, to get energy, to get healthcare, to get education. And I got to take care of my kid. And let's hope that everyone survives. Yeah.
I mean, it's worse in some places, obviously. You mentioned the immigrant attitude. You were talking about, though, coming to America and, you've got these opportunities to work and this type of job, and, you're escaping some kind of oppression maybe. But there are other places where it's even worse. So it's to some extent the human condition, too. But we could be so much better is what we're saying.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, that's the American guilt. It's like, well, we're better than most, and you should be grateful. And if you don't like it, leave it. And like the rest of us are like, but why are we the most powerful and wealthy country that somehow finds like absurd amounts of money to bail out terrible industries and the military-industrial complex and wars, but we won't give money to our fellow citizens to make life better? I think that's the key thing. You just said it. It could be so much better. And why are we content with this?
Do you feel like you've been given a fair shake by the industries that you've worked in? Because I feel like I certainly have. And to some extent, I feel like I probably got more than I even deserved based on my talent and even my work ethic, which I'm not putting down. I just think that, being who I am and having the opportunities, I give myself a lot of credit for it. But you're like one of the smartest, funniest people I know, and you've had an amazing career. But I do sometimes wonder about someone like you or Elie Mystal, people who are just slam dunks every time they go anywhere to explain things. Everybody loves them. And it's hard not to think that you haven't been given a fair shake, but I don't even want to plant that in your head if that's not your attitude.
No, if you're talking to my parents, the answer is yes. If you're talking to my wife, the answer is yes. Elie and I have talked about this privately. The answer is yes. Because I think about it, right? Look, compared to most, I've had a good career. So I have to preface it by saying, what do you mean? You wrote for the New York Times. You're a columnist for the Daily Beast. Somehow
you've done
you're
a tremendous amount. Yeah.
Yeah, you published a book.
In high demand.
But the path to get there was so much harder. The type of work, the type of talent, the type of gymnastics that we had to engage in just to be able to get to this point is so much more than so many of my peers, right? It just is. And in the last 2 years, especially with the murder of George Floyd, as more and more people are doing like an audit of the whiteness of these industries. They're like, oh, you darkies weren't complaining. Look at that. Look at that. Opportunities are given to white folks, and look at the people in leadership and look at the pay rates. And so it is one of those situations, like, especially my parents, right? They'll watch TV, or even my agent, who was a white guy. He saw me on CNN. He's like, dude, you are so much faster and smarter than most.
Yeah.
They put you in any situation, you could tackle it. I've seen you in debates. I've seen you in panels. You bring in a light touch. You come prepared.
Yes.
Like, they threw you in there. Anything you've done like, you've run circles around everyone else. You've seen me on panels. You've seen me give speeches. You've seen me write political articles. You've seen me write like books. And I sit there and go, like, look at my talent range, and then compare it to like these other schmucks who are getting paid so much more. And like Ellie, same thing, right? Like, Ellie still doesn't have a contract on MSNBC. And eventually you're like, okay, it's because we don't fit a certain profile. We're still seen as dangerous. We're not necessarily vanilla. Ellie is the angry black man who's not palatable to Rust Belt audiences. I'm the Muslim brown guy who somehow is funny, but at the same time might slap you. Right? I don't have the mentors or the peers who are going to give me the opportunities. And so we have to Trojan horse every situation. So yeah, there is a part of me, I won't lie, and a part of many people of color who've reached this status, like, shit, man, if we were white, where would we be?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's probably an unhealthy way to think, because there's not much you can do about that specifically outside of advocate for yourself and other people that, follow along. But I don't know. I think guys like you and Ellie are like the Colin Kaepernicks of political punditry. I mean, it's the weirdest thing in the world in media that I've experienced, that I've seen, and I've seen a lot, and I'm friends with a lot of people, and I talk to all of them about the gossip, is you not having your contract renewed and Ellie never getting a contract. They are, and the other weird thing is that there's not somebody with $1 million that just steps up and hands it to you two. And then makes money in the lane that you're in. Like, who gives a shit? That's the problem with cable news, is that they care about what a certain segment of the population thinks because they need them to watch. When in fact, if you just feed people what they want, which is the Waj and Ellie show, we'd buy it. We'd buy it, right? It'd be like the milkshake, and we'd sip it, we'd drink it all.
No, some would, and some people would get gas and be lactose intolerant, which is fine. You can't win them all. You can't, it's fine. Yeah, some people don't like chocolate; they like vanilla. It's okay,
but it's a
hustle and hope that your community comes out and then it breaks the mainstream, so it makes a profit. I'm just giving you an example of a mainstream movies. That's where me and Ellie are. And what Ellie had said to me one time before, and I think he said it publicly, is Ellie and I, if you really think about it, are far more skilled than our white colleagues.
Without a doubt.
Because not only do we have to gain authenticity and a mastery in our own cultures, we have to break through to white cultures. Whereas many of our white colleagues only exist in the very safe cocoon of a mainstream institution that has only catered to white gaze. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think if people don't understand that, then either they're not paying attention or they just don't want to. All right, well, now that grudge is settled, I mean, I think it's important for people to hear that conversation and to hear your experience, his and others as well, because it's just so evident in the...
But I try not to be bitter, because I realize, like you said earlier...
You don't strike me as that. To be clear, I brought it up. I basically said to you, I was thinking about you. Do you ever feel this way? And you answered my question, but I've never sensed you as someone ever, and you'd have every right to be better. So sorry.
Because then you spend your whole life shaking your fist at the wind, and you have every right to have that rage and anger and frustration. But I'm like, all right, with the time that I have, I got to maneuver the situation, and I want to get the last laugh. Like, at the end of the day, I want to be like Bugs Bunny. I want to get the last laugh and the last word. So
well, I think in many ways you do, in almost all of your appearances and all of the work that you do. And I think in the end you will as well. That's what I believe. So if I can do anything about it, that's for damn sure. Let me ask you about the hearings. You've been writing about this at the Daily Beast, of course. Your piece from a couple weeks ago, or June 9th at the Daily Beast, name and shame the ideology behind January 6th. Democrats should insist, you say, that Republicans denounce this racist, undemocratic ideology as a danger to our country and to American safety. What is the name of the ideology? What do you call it again?
White Christian nationalism. That is the ideology. That is the political movement. It's coming after all of us, and we're recording this on a Tuesday where we just heard the hearing for the January 6th committee. But the Supreme Court came out today, and Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, worried about, and I think rightfully so, about the separation of church and state being completely obliterated by this right-wing Christian majority, in which Maine cannot be exempt from giving funds to these religious Christian schools, right? And so if you see what happened in January 6th, the great report came out in February by authors and scholars and experts on white Christian nationalism, said that Christian nationalism was one of the main drivers of the violent insurrection that left 5 people dead. The slogans, the mantras, it was all there. If you're seeing people like Mike Pence, if you're seeing folks like Doug Mastriano, who's the GOP nominee to be the governor of Pennsylvania, openly white Christian nationalists who are committed to the big lie. Mastriano, by the way, was at the violent insurrection, right? These people are openly telling you that they believe this is a Christian nation, a special nation favored by God, entrusted in particular to white Christian men to implement Christian values and morals and ethics to pave the way for the kingdom of heaven on earth. And as such, those individuals who are against that mission, those include, by the way, women, feminists, gays, immigrants, people of color, Muslims. They are, quote unquote, invaders, and they're trying to take away their country from them. And so if you have the mandate from God and you believe that your right is being taken away from invaders, what will you do? You will use violence to stand your ground and take back your country. And this is what we're witnessing literally across the spectrum. School boards, you know this, medical boards, city council. You saw the testimony today. Every single witness, whether they were Republicans or Wandrea Moss and her mother, said that they, as a result of simply doing their job and saying, hey, Biden won, what happened? Every single one of them talked about how they're being threatened by MAGA. This is where we're at.
While I don't disagree with anything about the labels and the analysis, and I think it's been well documented by scholars and journalists, white Christian nationalism, it is interesting, Waj, and I wonder what you think about it, to watch them eat themselves. So white Christian nationalists eating other white Christian nationalists, whether it be Mike Pence or these guys that we're giving all this credit to, these Republicans that are testifying at these hearings, but in fact agree with much of the ideology. They just wouldn't cross the line because probably to some extent it's less about their integrity, and it's a bet they made, you know, the Brad Raffenspergers of the world, saying, I can't break the law for Trump. That might not be worth it because I could get caught. Exactly it's not like, I don't know. What do you think about the eating their own idea? Seeing, who is it? This guy going after, you know, at the Texas GOP convention, going after Ted Cruz, Stein, and Crenshaw. Yes, eating.
They went after Crenshaw. They went after Kinzinger. They went after Pence. They tried to kill him. Every single witness that we heard of said they got death threats. I think you made a good point. I just released an article about this, talking about MAGA eating its own. Right? I said cannibal MAGA coming home to roost with AK-47s and AR-15s. Right? Basically, what we're witnessing is the purge, the great MAGA purge. And it's an important point because Brad Raffensperger, who's a Georgia Secretary of State, who refused Trump's command to find the votes, literally find the votes. We have the audio tape. And Bill Barr, now we know through the testimony hearings, thought all this was bullshit and dangerous. Both those men in particular have still said, yeah, if Donald Trump runs in 2024, I'll vote for him. Mike Pence is still committed to the Republican Party. All these individuals, even Liz Cheney, voted with Donald Trump 92.9% of the time. However, when it came to a violent insurrection where a violent mob almost killed them and an illegal coup, that's when these people said, that's a bridge too far. But the reason why they said that was exactly what you said. It's too far. It's unethical. It's illegal. I can't do it. But if Trump was to win legally, we'd support him. And so what you're witnessing is a radicalized movement, which is eating even those lifelong conservatives like Brad Raffensperger and Bill Barr and Mike Pence, who completely prostrated themselves to Trumpism. Even that is not enough, Pete. That's what's so terrifying. Like, you can be a lifelong hardcore right-wing Christian nationalist like Mike Pence. You could be an extreme right-winger like Dan Crenshaw. But if you don't commit to the big lie, and if you don't go hook, line, and sinker with whatever MAGA is saying, excommunicated. Not only excommunicated, violence, intimidation. So if that's what they're doing to lifelong hard right Republicans, what will they do to the rest of us? And that's the question that people aren't asking.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, it's a cult within the movement, because it's not a cult. The Christian white nationalism has been animated for, especially for the last 30 years, since just before Reagan, right? That's been a movement. But then there's this kind of cult within that movement where they're, I guess, that much further extreme. And yet, they talk about, what is it, Team Normal? You wrote a piece as well about the Sorry Ex-Trumpers. There is no Team Normal for the GOP. It's really hard to split that hair, but I think it's important to, as you have. I don't know if you'd add anything else before I ask you something.
Yeah, well, that was the quote, not my quote, but last week's hearing, Bill Stepien, who was a Trump staffer, said,
the former campaign manager of Trump, I think.
Yeah, campaign manager. Thank you.
Yeah.
We were Team Normal, and then there was Team Rudy, who was Team Crazy. And the Team Normal internally said that this was nuts, but all these cowards never said it publicly. And my article, as I argue then and as I argue now, is what's Team Normal? Like, there is no Team Normal. Team quote unquote crazy is literally the GOP. A majority of the GOP believes in the big lie. A majority of them believe in the white supremacist replacement theory. You see them being purged right now. If you're not extreme enough and believe in the big lie, you're seeing the association with the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and violence. You're seeing them adulate murderers like Kyle Rittenhouse and Eddie Gallagher, and people who brandish guns against BLM protesters like Mark McCloskey, who's now running for Senate in Missouri after he was pardoned, by the way, by Republicans. They're still committed to Trump and Trumpism. They think climate change is a hoax. They don't believe in vaccines. I mean, we could go down the list. This is top of my head.
Yeah.
So show me the normal. And also Marjorie Taylor Greene has not been excised from the party, and she went after Dan Crenshaw. So I thought Crenshaw, like 2 years ago, was hard right. Crenshaw isn't even hard right enough for Marjorie Taylor Greene,
right,
who suck a posse against him at the Texas GOP. And speaking about the Texas GOP, let's talk about their convention platform where they openly want to secede in 2024. This is the Texas GOP. And they said that gay people are living an abnormal lifestyle. And they're like, are you sure you want to make this national? And they're like, yes, keep that in there.
Did you see Nick Fuentes attacking Seb Gorka? That was another great example.
Oh, that's amazing. MAGA on MAGA crime. I missed it. When did that happen?
Just a couple days ago. But basically, Gorka found out he was talking to a Nick Fuentes disciple, the representative. And
Groypers, the white supremacists.
Yeah, and Gorka went off on Fuentes for being a Holocaust denier.
Because he is a Holocaust denier.
Okay, and so Gorka's been called a Nazi a few times and been affiliated with the far-right extremists in Europe and Hungary, I think. But
when you lose Gorka.
Yeah, when you lose Gorka. But more importantly, the guy's like, the weird guy who was a Nick Fuentes like reporter or whatever, he said, this guy doesn't even think or won't even call gay people pedophiles. Like, that's, I just think it's important that that's where they're at. That's where we're at. That's where the Texas Republicans are at. The LGBT community is now being equated every day, and people who are their allies, me, Mallory McMorrow, probably you, as pedophiles. And that's
not just them, Pete. I'm glad you mentioned that, because from today's hearing, we're recording this on Tuesday, Arizona Republican Rusty Bowers, lifelong conservative, hardcore right-wing Trump supporter, probably not a Christian nationalist, but very Christian. Just because he did not go along with the big lie, he admitted today, they called him a pedophile. Yeah. You and me are old enough to remember that if you called someone a pedophile, those were fighting words.
Yo.
Like, you would throw down. You called me a pedophile? Like, not only that, pedophiles are the inmates in prison who get killed by other inmates.
Good point.
Right? Pedophile is a death sentence. If someone calls you a pedophile, that's over, man. You get beaten up, you get isolated, you get excommunicated, no one wants to hang around you, right? They're casually now throwing this QAnon talking point of pedogrifters and pedophiles against fellow Republicans whom they know aren't pedophiles, literally putting a target on their back. It's like the famous movie. And so it's one of those situations. Well, what's going to be the end result? The end result is going to be violence. And let me attach it to another story that came out yesterday. Eric Greitens, who's running for Senate, former Missouri governor, who, by the way, was accused by a woman of kidnapping her, tying her up in the basement, blindfolding her, and forcing her to have sex with him, and then taking lewd photos as blackmail. And also his ex-wife accused him of child abuse. But other than that, great guy. He released an ad yesterday where he bum rushed a house carrying a shotgun alongside armed masked men. And he was hunting not invaders, not immigrants, not Muslims, not Pete Dominic, not liberals, hunting rhinos, Republicans in name only. This is a purge. This is a purge of the party. It's going to be a purge of democracy. It's going to be a purge of our institutions. And meanwhile, people who have enabled it, like Chris Christie, are getting paid contracts on ABC News.
Oh, God. Yeah, what did he say? Oh, God, I don't even want to know. But
he tried to make a both sides equivalence between the January 6th insurrection and the Paula Jones Clinton hearing.
Oh, God. Or how about the equivalency between Triumph the Insult Dog with Robert Smigel and a bunch of Colbert staffers and the insurrectionists? We've heard that, too.
These people are shameless, man. These people are utterly shameless. And I don't think the sad part is the majority doesn't realize what we're up against.
That's because they haven't been called pedophiles and had their reputations dragged through the mud yet. But I feel like if you haven't been called a pedophile yet, you aren't really, you don't have a lot of integrity. You haven't really stood up to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's a test that you're doing the right thing, and it's if you've been called a pedophile by the GOP. I've been called that's how nerd liberals brandish their bona fides. Like, have you been called a pedophile yet? Not yet, but I will. Come back to me.
I'm still at libtard status.
I know. That's because you haven't put in the effort, libtard. Level up and come to pedophile and join the rest of us. And then you just slap him with the back of your hand.
Defend a gay person or admit you sucked one dick. You'll get it.
Have you defended a gay yet? No.
Why are we so old?
That's it's like old gamesmanship. And you're like, he goes, I'm still called a pinko communist. Bah, you're stuck in the war on terror. Join the 21st century.
How about this one? I wanted to ask you about Trump saying to Mike Pence, listen, if you don't decertify, I'm not going to be a friend anymore. And same thing with Stepien and even Jared and Ivanka and everybody else. You know, all the way to Rex Tillerson and everybody. Yeah. Donald Trump, his whole career, but especially as president, he told people to do things that were both illegal and they couldn't, even if they were creative, do them. Like he would just say, can't we do this? Go do that. It would be like me saying to you, Waj, go set that school on fire. If you don't, I won't be your friend anymore. And you look at me like, why would I do that? I'll go to jail if I do that.
Well, it's a mob boss, and it's a mob boss that is pressuring his lieutenants, right? That's what we're witnessing in the hearing from this investigation. Just look at the conversation between him and Brad Raffensperger, right? Forcing him, cajoling him, threatening him, basically find me the votes. Find me 11,000 votes. Why aren't you finding me the votes? How come you're not going along with the plan? And he knows at his disposal, he has an entire right-wing media ecosystem that then radicalizes enough people who can be a violent base. Because I'll give you an example. Dan Crenshaw, right-wing Republican at the Texas GOP, was accosted by hard MAGA activists who were repeating Tucker Carlson's claim of eye patch McCain.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof.
And remember Pete Davidson when he made that benign joke against Crenshaw a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
And then it was like this is where I just get so. It's like I'm watching the Peanuts cartoon between Charlie Brown and Lucy. All the major institutions bend the knee to bad faith actors who whine and complain, and everyone does the finger wagging and how dare you SNL. And so Crenshaw then gets prime real estate with Pete Davidson side by side, helps his career. Pete Davidson apologizes. And then you fast forward and the same people who are whining and complaining about liberal assault against the right wing are calling Dan Crenshaw eye patch McCain and applauding as he's being accosted. Like, this is what, like, it's like the football episode. We are Charlie Brown, they are Lucy, and we keep falling for the football trick, and it pains me.
Two more quick ones. Can you do it?
Yeah.
All right. First, you mentioned Lady Ruby and Wandrea Moss, yes. But your tweet, who testified yesterday, but your tweet is black women like Lady Ruby and Wandrea Moss stepping up again against a great cost to protect America from white supremacy, same as it ever was. What more do you want to say about their testimony yesterday and what they've been through?
Yeah, so Andrea Moss and her mom testified that, they thought they were doing their democratic duty, in the long line of black activists who had to literally fight and die for the right to vote. They were poll watchers and local, I think, election officials, right? And as a result, specifically of doing their job in Fulton County in Georgia, which was, of course, as you know, a pivotal race that helped Joe Biden win by, I think, nearly 12,000 votes. They were accosted, threatened, mocked, ridiculed by this MAGA base. As a result, Wandrea Moss, the daughter, talked about how essentially she looked terrified. I mean, she looked like she was traumatized. She talked about her trauma. She's gained 60 pounds weight. She's afraid to go out. She quit her job, which is exactly part and parcel of the precinct strategy done by the GOP, is to pressure enough people in the school boards and the medical boards in local precincts to quit because they're like, shit, this isn't worth it. And then when they seed the ground, who comes and takes over, Pete? They do. The cult does. So they quit their job and they're terrified and they feel like, they can't say their name. They can't use their name publicly. And so look at the cost specifically to these two black women who aren't wealthy for doing their job. And yet you have these white men who are being applauded, who still will vote for Trump and seen as heroes. And these other white men who are subpoenaed, who won't show up to testify. And it's usually black folks and poor folks like Wandrea Moss and her mom who have stepped up and fought for democracy at tremendous cost to their physical health, their mental health, and their financial health. So the fact that they're trending for all the right reasons is great. And I hope someone can do a GoFundMe just to give them some time and money to cope, to move, to get a new job. But it's always people like her. It's always people like Wandrea Moss and her mom who are the unsung heroes of U.S. history, who fight for a country that doesn't fight for them, who have to love a country that doesn't always love them back.
So well said. Last question I want to ask you is going back to what we talked about at the very beginning in terms of the Supreme Court decision, which got kind of overshadowed by the testimony. We knew today might be a very busy news day, but now the decision is about the state of Maine now having to fund religious schools, basically. And it's about a separation of church and state. It's a really important issue to talk about for a lot of reasons. But what your tweets are basically saying are, do Maine taxpayers have to fund a Church of Satan school? I mean, based on the Supreme Court ruling, the answer would have to be yes, right? And how about private Islamic schools and Jewish schools? They should open up all over the Maine. The state has to fund you now, so take advantage of it. Move your communities, move all the Muslims and Jews to Maine and see what the Supreme Court says. I love it. It's not probably going to happen, but what are your thoughts on this decision? And
so the right wing has caught up on that tweet and tried to own me by saying, exactly, this is what we want. We're fine with it. We welcome it. Ha. And, we're joined by some Jewish schools and Islamic schools. And what they missed, of course, the context is that this is a white Christian nationalist project. It is for white Christians. The Supreme Court, which has a right-wing majority, has a history recently of favoring white Christians. They're using Jews and Muslims to go along with it, but it's a white Christian nationalist project. And as we have seen, with people of color exercise the same rights as white folks, different standards apply. Let me give you a few examples. BLM, terrorists, protesters, January 6th violent insurrectionists, ordinary citizens. Black Panthers carrying their guns. What happened immediately in California? Gun reform, right? That's what happened. White people do it. Kyle Rittenhouse is a hero. When black and brown folks move into white communities, not in my backyards, redistricting. There's no way those black kids are going to go to our white kids' schools. We're going to drain the pool, right? So they're missing the double standards at play that I think if Muslim and Jewish schools were then to overtake Christian schools in white communities as a result of the Supreme Court ruling, as a student of U.S. history, I think there would be a very different reaction. That's my 2 cents. You might disagree with me.
Oh, I don't at all. And I'm going to be talking to a historian next, Kenneth C. Davis, about the history of the separation of church and state, what the founders believed, and more. Any questions for him?
Well, yeah, if you can, ask him about how this is a long gestating project that might come to fruition after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, because I think people don't realize that this is a long-term project to hollow out and dismantle public schools.
Yes.
And people aren't making that connection. This was the part and parcel of the culture war. This is what ignited it. It was after 1954. It was after the end of segregation. And, now with CRT It gives them an excuse to do it, specifically anti-trans, right? It went from anti-black to anti-trans real quick.
Well, it's a two-front.
It's still anti-black, but now with trans, the reason why the trans is so successful is because it's too much too soon.
Yeah.
So a lot of suburban parents, a lot of liberals, by the way, are like,
agreed.
We've talked about this.
I'm okay with my kid being gay. I'm not okay with my kid being a different gender than he or she.
There you go.
Born.
Now they're teaching my kids to be transgender.
Yeah.
Now I have to accept if my son wants to chop off his penis.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just getting my head around gay marriage and gay sex. But now if I don't say anything, once you connect it to kids, game changer. And liberals still don't realize this is going to win over a lot of liberal and independent suburban voters. You and I know this. But I think what people don't realize, the long end game is crushing the public school system that educates 90% of our kids.
Amen to that. I mean, not amen to that.
Ask him, am I right? Am I wrong? Is this what's the next step?
I already actually pre-interviewed him a little bit. That actually is exactly what he said first. So
I'm not crazy.
Yeah. No, not at all. No, I mean, it's history. It's been so well documented. And all right. Well, listen. I love you. I appreciate you, and I thank you very much for joining me. Any light notes to end on? Any child stories? Any toys that you bought yourself? Any how's your exercise regime? Are you? I
put the Batwing. So you'll be proud of me that I've sold some old Lego sets to subsidize new Lego sets.
Oh,
and
great.
Apparently there's a community of like grown men here who like buy them.
Sure.
So that's fantastic. And I'm watching this show, which I think is pretty effective because of the cast mostly, even though it's derivative, but it's actually well done. It's called The Old Man with Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow on FX. Pretty good show.
Oh,
have you seen it yet?
No, I never even heard of it.
Just came out 2 days ago.
But who doesn't love those two actors?
It's like Jeff Bridges as Liam Neeson from Taken, but like it has a really good cast and it's well done. I think you and I would. It's just really well made and well acted. The Old Man
on FX. Is that what it is? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Great. Both great notes to end on. Wajahat Ali, we love you. We appreciate you. We honor you.
See you, man.
Thank you, buddy.
See you next week, hopefully. Later, bro.
All right, there he goes, Wajahat Ali. Everybody, go follow him on Twitter. Read him at The Daily Beast. Support him all you can. Get his book, of course, everybody, I should say. That's where the money's at for him. Go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to become American. So good, as is he always. Wajali.com for more from him. And now it's time to talk to Kenneth C. Davis, who I just told you we would be talking to next. He, of course, is my favorite historian. I talk to him at least once a month. I think I might talk to him twice over the next, today and then next week. I'm going to talk to him as well. I'm hoping, at least, because we love talking to Kenneth C. Davis. And we are here to talk about the history of the separation between church and state and whatever else we get to. Don'tKnowMuch.com is his website. You got to get all of his books. Hire him to speak to your group, your classroom, or whatever. He is just the best. His most recent book is Strongman, The Rise of Five Dictators and the Fall of Democracy. And he's got, I should say his newest book, November 2022, is a great short book. A year of reading briefly. You should get that. Here now, my latest conversation with the greatest historian of our time, according to me, at Kenneth C. Davis on Twitter. Let's go. There he is, Kenneth C. Davis, joining me now, and I'm very, very happy that you're here to talk about the Supreme Court rejecting Maine's ban on aid to religious schools, because there is so much history tied up here. Welcome back to Stand Up. We are so excited to be in your classroom, sir.
Pete, it is always a pleasure to be with you. And as soon as I saw this news come across my notifications today, I said, I have to talk to Pete about this. So you were truly the first person I reached out to. And lo and behold, you claim that I was the first person you reached out to. So
yeah, no, I actually got your email. I mean, we'll pull the curtain back. I got your email. I was with my daughter at an appointment. She was inside. I read your email. I emailed you back immediately and said, can we talk about this tonight? And then I said, that was a confusing email. And I called you and you did this weird thing where you answered your phone and we spoke about it.
Well, that's the way I am. I answer the phone when it's not spam risk or a bank or a Nigerian prince calling.
It is weird because I tried to sell you a warranty on your car for a while, but you were not having it because of caller ID. So, but okay. I also was thinking about, of course, me, I was thinking about Jefferson's Wall of Separation, and I was also thinking about Madison's remonstrance. Is that how it's pronounced? Or I was reading your...
Remonstrance?
Yes, of course. Or I was reading your tweets about those two things. But where do we start today, Professor?
Let me start, first of all, by saying I'm not a professor, nor am I a lawyer, nor am I truly a constitutional scholar, but I can read. And I have the U.S. Constitution that I keep by my desk. And I also happen to have the writings of James Madison also near my desk. And these things come in handy when people want to say, well, what would the founders say? And of course, this is one of those perfect moments for people who don't fully understand what the Supreme Court decided today. The state of Maine, it's a large state physically, but a small state in population. It's a rural state in many cases. A lot of the what we would think of as school districts don't have enough kids to support a high school. So what some small towns do is essentially say, we will tuition our students into the school of their choice. And that could be, they could go to another nearby public school. They can go to certain private schools. And rather than supporting with tax dollars a high school, the tax dollars go to paying tuition either at another public school or at a private school. This is not that unusual. I've experienced it myself. We used to own a home in Vermont, a small town that did not have a high school. Most of the kids who graduated went to the high school in the next town over where they were tuitioned in. And that's a perfectly reasonable solution to a problem of not being able to afford your own high school for a small school district. The issue here was the state of Maine had said, we are only going to pay tuition for secular schools that do not promote a particular religion or espouse a religion. And they're basing that on something called the United States Constitution, Amendment 1, which says, and we'll read it here, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, as these are referred to. Essentially, what that means is that Congress should keep out of our religious beliefs. They can't tell us what to pray, how to pray, which church to belong to, whether we should belong to any church, and certainly then also says that the Congress can't make any laws that say you can't practice that religion. That is the essence of freedom of speech. It's a double-edged sword. Throughout most of our history, there were no public schools until well into the 19th century. I know we'd all like to think of the one-room schoolhouse on Little House on the Prairie or something, but public education is much more modern creation. And so through all of that time, the idea was public education was meant to be set up to provide education to all. People who chose to have their children go to a private school or a parochial school, whether it's Catholic, Jewish, whatever, were then expected to pay that tuition themselves, that the government was not going to pay tuition to a religious organization because that was, in fact, supporting a religion. There's, you can make some interesting arguments here about, well, as long as you support all religions, what does it matter? I'm a kind of an absolutist on this idea. I believe that tax dollars, public tax dollars, the money I pay to the government in income tax, in state tax, whatever it is, property taxes, funds, education, should not go to support religious institutions, period. I just think it's a bad idea. That's the reason that religious institutions are not taxed. They don't pay taxes because the government cannot make any rules about them.
Right.
They are supposed to be non-political, and they often break that boundary. But that in theory is why churches are tax exempt. The Supreme Court today said that Maine's law, which banned this tuition money going to religious schools, is not fair, not constitutional, because it breaks the part of the half of that compact in the First Amendment, because they're basically saying by denying the money to the religious schools, you are denying their free exercise clause, which we've been moving towards this in many ways in a lot of decisions over the past few years. But this is clearly a case where we know that this court has really swung in so many ways to a far more, I don't want to say conservative, because I think a lot of conservatives would argue, no, the conservative idea is that the government stays out of religion.
Right, yeah. Before the, right.
I don't want to say this is a conservative decision. I would like to say it's a something of a right-wing nationalist Christian decision.
It's a Christian decision, yeah.
And America, as I've written many times over the years, is not a Christian nation. As much as people would like to say so, it is not.
Let's talk about that. But just real quick, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, one of the three dissenters, wrote, "This court continues to dismantle the wall of separation between church and state that the framers fought to build." So I guess you can pick up there. I hadn't read her dissent yet. And so I like to think, that sounds pretty good, because I basically tweeted out exactly the same thing as soon as I read the story this morning, that except that this is more than dismantling. Dismantling seems to me to be taking out brick by brick, taking a wall down piece by piece. This decision, in light of some of the other recent decisions, is really taking a wrecking ball to the wall of separation between church and state. And let me give you a little bit of history about where that phrase comes from. Yeah. It is not in the Constitution. It is not in any official document anywhere. That line of the wall of separation between church and state actually comes from a letter that President Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association in Danbury, Connecticut. And he wrote in that letter, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment or religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof," the First Amendment, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So this is, a central idea in Jefferson's thinking, in his own, he was, we would call him a deist, I suppose, which meant he was certainly raised in Christian principles. I think he would probably say he rejected the divinity of Jesus Christ. I don't want to get into a theology conversation here, but Thomas Jefferson was certainly not a Christian in the very traditional sense that we think of Christian, nor was George Washington. These were men who were, to a large degree, deists. They believed in a power, a supreme power, sometimes referred to as providence, but less so in the strict tenets of any specific religious organization. So these men... Is there much debate on that?
There's no debate on that. I don't think anybody would seriously... there are people who certainly would like to debate it, because they would say, well, they opened Congress with a prayer and they paid for a chaplain, which I've always thought they shouldn't do. But, I'm willing to let that one slide.
In God we trust, the Pledge of Allegiance. What
in
else?
God we trust in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm glad you brought those up. In God we trust on our money now. It was not on our money until it was introduced during the Civil War. It was introduced by a very devout Christian who was the Secretary of Treasury, and he sort of did it on his own. So that was a personal decision that eventually became a legal and standing. The Pledge of Allegiance, which was written in 1892, did not include the words "under God." Those words were added in 1953, I believe, during the Eisenhower administration. It was during the period of anti-communism, where we were so afraid of the godless atheists, socialists, and communists that we added the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which immediately went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said school children don't have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance because of the First Amendment. So at least in the 1950s, the Supreme Court was, more accommodating of the idea that government should stay out of religion. We've had now this very, very hard swing on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, you'd say so.
That is pushing back on a lot of these things. There's a bigger issue here, and that's something I think we should really talk about, which is that this isn't just about religion in school. This isn't just about praying at a football game. This is really part of a much wider, I believe, assault on public education.
Yes, indeed.
It's a long-standing, I would say, largely Republican and largely the far right end of the Republican Party, pushing back on the idea of public school education. And it comes through in many ways. I think that's partly because they think that public education is liberal and they want to, own the libs. They also want to break the power of the teachers union. The largest union in this country is the United Federation of Teachers. There are two teachers unions. Yeah. So these teacher unions are very powerful. And at both the national and state level, there's been a concerted effort to break the power of unions over schools, which is, very much in keeping with Republican anti-union sentiment and strategies. But there's something more at the heart of it. This movement into private schools really began in this country in a large way just after 1954, the year I happen to have been born, with the decision called Brown versus Board of Education. What happened when Brown versus Board of Education was announced? Of course, ending segregated public schools, saying that education could no longer be separate and equal because it was neither. It was separate, but it was certainly unequal. The Brown versus Board of Education decision started the great white flight from public schools, especially in the segregated South, but later spread across the country. White flight, suburban schools, introducing busing. We know it was very, very, very destructive of a lot of communities. Was busing the perfect strategy to fix the problem of segregation in public schools? Perhaps not, but we could debate what was a better way to do it. We shouldn't debate the fact that the public school system was extremely unfair and extremely segregated, and certainly was separate but unequal. So this movement to private schools, which ties into this question that was decided today by the Supreme Court, is part of a very, very long-term strategy, I believe, to attack public education.
Yeah, I mean, you say you believe as if it's an opinion, and I guess it is, but I mean, the strategy has been clear forever and continues to be. It's interesting how the strategy transforms, the arguments change, the charter schools, whatever, what have you. But I've been covering this issue forever, and I just want to say just quickly, there are so many things that I have been critical of. Well, the experts that I listen to have been critical of about public education, from testing to class size to funding to corruption and so on. But this idea of being anti-science and anti-religion and anti-accurate history, or rather pro-religion and accurate history, that's what's always been there from the Scopes monkey trial to CRT, right?
That is correct. And that is why public education has been under attack by the forces that would like to have the world be the world where Adam and Eve were created and there was no evolution and Darwin was mistaken and we should go to school and read our Bibles and say our prayers.
And there are no gay people.
That specifically came up in this main case today because one of the two schools that had brought this suit, one of the Christian schools, is a Bible-believing school in which they teach that homosexuality is an abomination in the eyes of God. That's my words, not theirs. So. I don't know if they specifically said that, but the point is that we fund things with tax dollars because we think they are good, right, the best for we the people. When we start to fund things for a religious group at the expense of the rest of us, that's when we get into very dangerous territory. And by the way, since I said we're talking about the Constitution and we're talking a lot today about oaths, I'm sure you watched the hearings as I did, and the question of oaths came up quite a bit. Let me just read something else from the Constitution. This is Article 6. Most people never bother to look at this part. It's not one of the interesting parts. But it says basically that it talks about the supremacy of the national government, a very important idea. And it says that the senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, so this applies to the states as well, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support the Constitution. We heard a lot about that today. Goes on today, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. And that is why the presidential oath of office does not include the words under God, even though most presidents have said that. It's a tradition. It's certainly not in the Constitution. These are, really, I think, important matters. They were certainly important matters. You asked about the founders, and I talked about Jefferson's letter of 1802 to the Danbury Church. But before that, in 1776, before we had a constitution, Jefferson wrote what he called the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. And he drafted this in 1776 as an attempt to provide religious freedom to, and these are Jefferson's words, to the Jew, the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, and he meant an Islamic believer, the Hindu, and the infidel of every denomination. So that's Jefferson's writing in 1776, that very memorable year. And part of this was that it was widely accepted and established in the colonies at that time, because we still were colonies, that tax dollars supported churches. Now, in the North, the northern states, New England, tended to support congregational churches. In the southern states, it tended to support the Episcopal or Anglican, later it became Episcopal, the Anglican Church, which later became the Episcopal Church. So this was something that bothered Jefferson, and he wrote this piece of legislation, which wasn't accepted in Virginia until 1785, when Patrick Henry, famous for his words about resisting tyranny, give me liberty or give me death, Patrick Henry wanted to introduce a law very apropos to this main issue, that state money would be paid to teachers of religion. James Madison, a very close friend of Thomas Jefferson's, he was a little bit younger, but they were neighbors and good friends, wrote something called, that you mentioned early, the Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. And this was a very, very clear statement that the public should not pay for religious instruction. And that was finally passed in 1785, again, before the U.S. Constitution is passed, in Virginia. And that, in many ways, becomes the model for the First Amendment to the Constitution. It was passed in Virginia, striking down this idea that tax dollars, public dollars, would be paid for religious instruction. So there's a long history and a long tradition of this. I have not yet read the decision in this main case today. I'll be interested to do it. It seems to me to fly completely in the face of American traditions in terms of creating a secular state in which the government does not tell anyone how they can worship, and certainly doesn't pay anyone for their worship. Yes, we don't tax churches, nor do we fund them in extraordinary, unusual circumstances. Yes.
Who wrote this? This is a New York Times article that you shared on Twitter at Kenneth C. Davis. Jefferson's, quote, wall of separation is no longer being taken down brick by brick. It's being demolished. A quote from that article. I'm not sure who exactly said it.
Oh, that's me saying that.
That's your quote. Okay, got it. Of course it is.
But I have certainly written about this. Two pieces you can find on my website, and I'll probably post them because of this. Back in 2010, I wrote in Smithsonian Magazine, America's True History of Religious Tolerance. The idea that the United States has always been a bastion of religious freedom is totally at odds with the historical record. Then a few years later, I wrote for CNN.com a piece called Why the U.S. is Not a Christian Nation.
And I'll link to both those in today's show notes. I'm looking at them now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's just one thing about this Virginia statute for religious freedom that I mentioned, which Jefferson drafted back in 1776 and then was eventually passed in 1786 in Virginia. Jefferson thought that law was so important that he had that put on that's part of his epitaph.
Yeah.
On his grave marker, which is, if you go to Monticello, you'll see it. He cites 3 achievements in his life. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, he wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and he founded the helped found the University of Virginia. He did not mention the fact that he was the president of the United States of America. He thought that was one of the 3 most important things that he had done in his life. So if we are going to take this view, what would the founders think? What did the founders do? Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, just go down the list. These were men who had different views about their own religion and their own faith, but they did not believe that the government should be in the business of deciding who should worship what and who should be funded by it. One reason is, and this is an important point, they had just fought a war, a long war for independence against a king who was not only the head of state, but the head of the church. They understood very, very clearly what the difficulties, what the hazards of religious authoritarianism could mean in the country. And that's why I believe they and our Constitution really did prize the idea of making this a secular state, not a state that was founded on one religion or another.
Right, right. Oh, man. Well, people should read both those pieces. You know, you talk about it. One of them, I think, was inspired by the controversy around the Ground Zero Mosque. Wajahat Ali, who joined me earlier, talked, and tweeted about, well, this is really about, Christian schools and Christians' motivations and desires to create this kind of theocracy in America. But, man, if you had some Jewish schools and some Muslim schools and the Church of Satan, you have to wonder what the justices, if they would decide something different. But it's I guess, I don't know if it's hard to prove or not, but clearly these judges are basing their opinions not on the Constitution or precedent, but on their own personal views on religion. I think that's what I think.
I haven't read the decision, so I don't want to go that far yet until I do read it. But the swing in the court has been pronounced and powerful, and certainly, I would say, magnified and amplified with the last three appointments.
Yeah. It's understated for most of my guests, but you are you try very hard to be objective and stick to the facts, and that's why we love you. One of the many reasons. Anything else about this that I need to know before I let the greatest historian of our time go on religion and schools and separation and famous quotes and founding fathers and mothers?
Yeah, there's another writer, historian, and I'm not going to remember who it was, once summed it up so perfectly, and I've quoted this many times. I think it might be Thomas Fleming. He said Washington and Jefferson thought that the government was created to save our rights, not our souls. And to me, that's a perfect statement of what this is. So I think that the notion that there is the wall of separation between church and state, it's always been a wall that's a little shaky, but it's held for the most part. Now it's being not dismantled brick by brick, as I said, but demolished by jackhammers and wrecking balls.
Anything you want to say about the hearings, today's or any of the previous ones, as they relate to anything regarding history?
Well, I mean, it's dispiriting, it's frightening, and it's extraordinary to watch these hearings going on. Today, we did, as I mentioned, talking about the Constitution and the oath that the Constitution requires all officials to take. We heard so many people talk about their fealty to that oath. And one man said, it was really because of he was divinely guided by that feeling. So strong feelings, but, it's really remarkable how close we've come and still are to seeing this whole thing disappear.
There's all this talk of fealty to the Constitution, but another way of saying it is, listen, the reason I didn't do what the president and Rudy Giuliani were asking me to do is because it's illegal to do. It's against the law to do that. I have no way to do it. I have no right to do it. I have no power to do it. So as much as we talk about the Constitution and integrity, like he was being asked to break a law, they were being asked to break laws and find votes, etc. There was no option for that.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it back just one more historical perspective.
Sure,
and I hadn't given this a lot of thought, and this will be my last point on this, is that we're talking about Washington and Jefferson, and I'm first among many would say they were extremely flawed people with contradictions that we acknowledge today, and I've written about those contradictions a great deal. But they really did believe in this idea of the government protecting rights, the rights of man, people. And they really understood the danger of too much power in the hands of one man. And we saw today that danger laid out in congressional testimony that the power of one man to destroy people is a real one. And the founders certainly understood that. And that's one of the reasons they did believe in this Constitution with its checks and balances to keep one person from having too much power. And, in a more polite day, we could have the conversation of how much power should the president have. But certainly this power and this power of the pulpit that he has, the bully pulpit, is extraordinary. And we saw it on display and how one person could be crushed by it. And we are lucky that there were this handful of people, and they may have been his allies at another time, but in this case, they stood up to him, and we are lucky that they did.
Yeah, the power of, one person tweeting out lies about the most famous person in the world, tweeting out horrible, damaging lies about so many people throughout his career as the most powerful person, and we see and saw and continue to the destruction to people's lives and reputations at play, and that goes to what you're saying about what the founders and most Americans don't want, that much power concentrated in the hands of one. We can talk about authoritarianism, which, of course, you've written a book about as well. And I will be talking to you next week. So I'm looking forward to talking 4th of July and more with you. And I thank you so much, as always, for allowing us to be in your classroom, as always.
Thank you, Pete. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. This is really important stuff. It's interesting stuff. And I think, these hearings, I hope, are waking some people up to the stark reality of the dangers we face as a republic, as a democracy. So with that, we'll meet again down the road.
Looking forward to it next week. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Pete.
All right, there he goes. Kenneth C. Davis, everybody's favorite historian. Read those articles. I'll link to them in the show notes. And, of course, don'tknowmuch.com, his website. Get his books. Let him know that you heard him here on Twitter, as well as Wajahat Ali. Awesome guests, both great, very relevant and important, explaining things to us here on the show. So that's all I've got for you. Thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you tomorrow night at our Hangout. I'll be on the Karen Hunter Show, co-hosting tomorrow, by the way, 3 to 6 on Urban View on Sirius XM. So check that out and be the change that you want to see in the world, everybody. Thank you, Pete Coe. Thank you, John Carroll. I love you guys. Talk to you tomorrow.
I think you're driving wheels in leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up.